Once again, thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance. I'm Mike Scala, and we will be speaking of the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity and another Supreme Court decision that came out recently, which has a major impact on United States law. Of course, I'm joined, as always, by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's good, Jay?
Not a lot, man. It's been a dark couple of days with these decisions. It's crazy. So
Yeah, I gotta say, usually it feels like it's always Tuesday and we're always having these discussions. This is the first week in a while where it almost feels like it was Tuesday a month ago, 2 months ago, because so much has happened since last
right,
week to get into
right,
that it's like a lifetime ago.
right, exactly. It's insane. It's really insane. How are you doing? What's going on with you?
I'm doing pretty well overall. Last week we talked about the masters. I was waiting to hear on my album when we logged off, and
Right.
I had a bit of a saga with that over the past week because
Uh-oh.
the first ones that came back, actually, this was pre last week. I think I mentioned this. The first ones that came back sounded overcooked to me, right? It's too hot. So I had
Right.
to pull back on the harshness, the loudness factor, or the perceived loudness of it. And I got the new ones after the show last week. However, my car was in the shop, and I do use my car as a test, right, to see how it
Right.
sounds in the car speaker. I compare other songs to my songs to kind of check the levels. Well, my car was in the shop. I couldn't use the car test, and so I just used my headphones and other speakers. The new mixes and masters that came back sounded great in headphones and on other speakers, and I would compare them to other songs on streaming and think, perfect. The clarity is there. It's not too loud. It's rich. It's just how I want it to sound. And I was celebrating that, doing cartwheels over that, right? Then I got my car back from the shop, and I played those new masters in the car speaker, and it almost sounded like it wasn't mastered. It was like way too low. The bass was all gone. I'm like, oh man, now I got to find that balance between what we originally had and the new ones, because the new ones have great clarity, but they lost that bump factor that was there originally. So I said, let's go back and maybe we can combine those two. If you can get the most recent revisions, keep that clarity if you can, right? But
Right.
just make them louder and bring the bass up. That's all you got to do. I want more loudness and more bass. I know it's easier said than done, because when you start doing that, yeah, it's going to have an effect on the perceived loudness and perceived harshness of it. But if you can
Right.
find that, right, that sweet spot where it doesn't sound too overcooked, but it still bumps. And so that's what we're working on now. And I do hope to have those done. But, it's back to the drawing board. We're going to get there. We know what we want. And so it's just a matter of going through the iterations until we land on the right spot.
That's what's up. That's what's up. It's you're coming toward the end of a long journey.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
speaking of journeys, I wanted to talk about my journey to Atlantic City
Yeah,
on
you went to Chappelle's performance, right? Dave Chappelle.
Yes, I wanted to see Dave Chappelle. I saw when I was actually crossing the bridge a couple weeks ago. They advertised him on a billboard. The Hard Rock Casino has a billboard right by the Goethals Bridge. Is it the Goethals Bridge or the Outer Bridge? I think it might be the Outer Bridge going back into New York. So they were advertising Dave Chappelle, and I said, "Wow, he's probably my favorite comedian ever." I know some will say Pryor, some will say Eddie Murphy, a little before my time. Dave Chappelle
Right.
really is my generation, and so I would probably put him as the top comedian ever for me. And so I always wanted to see him perform live. He doesn't do a lot of shows in the US anymore. In fact, he said this was the first show he did in the US all year. What he's been doing is he bought the firehouse, the old firehouse in Ohio, where he lives, Yellow Springs, Ohio, and he turned that into a comedy club. And he's been doing shows exclusively at that comedy club in his hometown this year. And he's done some overseas shows as well. But this was the first US show he did all year outside of his hometown of Ohio. And so it was special because I knew that if I didn't go, I'd be kicking myself.
Right. That's what's up. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with you on that assessment as far as top comedians right now. Dave is the GOAT even to a lot of comedians. And you know what's really funny is his first special that he did years ago. I don't, Killing Him Softly, maybe that was what it's called.
Right.
My friend introduced it to me, and I tried to watch it like 2 or 3 times and fell asleep each time.
Really?
It just, I think when I turned it on, I was already sleepy
Yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever it
yeah.
was. And so it took me a while to actually get through it. And then I would get through it. And I'm like, wow, this is actually a pretty brilliant special. But yeah, it took me like 2 or 3 times.
Right. His style is different. And that's part of what I like about it. It comes off as very conversational. It doesn't come off as too rehearsed. In fact, he did two shows. He did a 7 o'clock show and 10 o'clock show last week. I almost wanted to see the other show to see how similar and how different it was going to be. Because when you watch him perform, he makes it all look like it's improvised, even though you know it's not. He's going into pre-prepared bits, but he's also doing some riffing and he does crowd work also. And he's very casual. He makes you feel like he's just talking to friends, kind of. And so I would have liked to see how similar, right? How much does he deviate from that in the second show compared to the first? But
Right.
I do like that about it. I also like that he talks about contemporary topics. In fact, he started off the show by saying, "So let's get right to it," and everyone laughed. Why? Because it was the night after the debate, and so they knew exactly what he was referring to without having to say it. So let's get right to it, And then the first line after that was, "Did you see the debates last night?" And by the way, little pet peeve of mine: there was only one debate. I don't like when people say the debates. What debates? There was one, right? But that's what he said. Did you see the debates? He said he didn't see it. He said he read about it in the paper, but it was exactly as he thought it was going to be. And he had the
Right.
line, are these the choices? These are the best choices we got. One of them is running from jail. The other one's running from hospice, So
Dang.
kind of an equal opportunity ass kicker, I would say. He wasn't
Yeah.
pushing a political narrative or an agenda. He's not a very political guy himself, but he knows to talk about it, right? It's funny because I'm sure he had whatever he was going to talk about planned prior to that, but he had to talk about the debate and the election because that was the previous night, right? So he probably would have felt like he wasn't giving it his all if he didn't address the elephant in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to say something about it. It just happened and
Yeah,
it was very talked about debate because of, the two who were up there, Biden's performance and Trump's lies. So yeah, it was
right,
so
right. So he went into that. Then he's, I guess he was on a roll because everyone was laughing at his presidential politics stuff. So he said, I've got some things to say about Israel and Gaza, but I probably shouldn't say it. And then, of course, people said, say it, So he's like, all right,
please
fine.
go for it.
Yeah. And he went and said it. Again, he was pretty balanced, I would say, in his approach. It wasn't like he was trying to shove a particular agenda down anyone's throats. He was a comedian telling jokes and just kind of laughing about world politics, right? So he started off that routine by saying that the Jewish people in the United States need our love and support right now because of what's going on in the Middle East. And he said they shouldn't have to turn to a country like Israel. You should let them know that they're more than welcome in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. And then he talked about Israel being genocidal. He mentioned the word genocidal. He was like, look, if you give them love and support here in the US, they won't feel like they have to lean on a genocidal regime overseas, right? That was, and again, most people were laughing because he was kind of doing this in a kind of neutral, comedic type kind of way. Apparently, there was one guy who was right in the front row. And it was kind of funny. If you didn't know better, you would think he was a plant. I know he wasn't, but it was kind of weird how he was in the front row, dead center, right? And he apparently stopped laughing at this point. I didn't see, I wasn't paying attention to that initially, but he moved on to other material after that. He started talking about other things completely. But then he went back to the guy, I guess, in the front row who had stopped laughing. And he said, oh, come on, man. He's like, you haven't laughed since I talked about Israel and Hamas. He was like, lighten up a bit. This is a comedy show. And then apparently the guy started shouting out some stuff. And Dave held the microphone out to him. He's like, I'm not going to give you the mic. He's like, but our Jewish friends, they want to be seen and heard right now. Let's hear what he has to say, because some people were being annoyed that this guy was interrupting the show. He's like, let's just hear him out and see what he has to say. And he held the mic to the front row, and he basically started a debate. I forget exactly what he said, but I know he started talking about the hostages and things like that. Dave was like, all right, all right. He's like, I hear you. That's certainly wrong. He was like, but if you look at the response that Israel has done, it's not proportionate to the hostages. Like, if you look at the innocent people who have been killed in Palestine that greatly outnumbers the number of hostages. And he was like, aren't their lives important too? And the guy said, yeah. And he was like, well, then start acting like it, right? Then the guy, he didn't want to let it go, though. He wanted to keep
Of
debating
course.
this. He started talking about Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, right? And Dave said, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. He's like, my country is run by a dead man. Who cares about democracy? That's what he said. So he was trying to deflect and, again, bring it back to the comedy, right?
Right, right, right.
Let's be able to laugh about stuff. But, understandably, some people are not able to laugh at it, but you kind of have to know what you're getting into. You're going to a comedy show. People, especially someone like that is going to make fun of what's in the news. And maybe he thought that that wasn't going to happen. I don't know. But it's kind of par for the course, I would think.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, that's one of those topics like we touched on last week where it's just that it's so divisive and people have such strong opinions and there's not a lot of leeway.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
forgot my microphone was further away from me.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
maybe this gentleman thought that that was going to be off limits, or, it triggered him, whatever the case. He ended up walking out. He stood up and started to leave. I think he had family with him, might have had a wife and a kid with him, I'm not sure, but walked out. People started booing at first, and he was like, no, 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 don't boo him. Everyone give him a round of applause. Thank him for coming to the show. He's like, again, people just want to be seen and heard right now. It's a very sensitive time. It's fine. So the crowd listened. They started clapping this guy as he left. And he's like, the guy, as he's walking out, he's like, come see me. He's like, come talk to me after the show. And Dave was like, come talk to you after the show. He's like, this is Atlantic City. I'm going to party after the show. I'm not going to talk to you. So he went on with the act after that. But what was interesting was he kept going back to it. And part of this is, I think, is just kind of his style because, again, he's very informal. And I think he wants the audience to feel like they're just buddies he's chatting with on stage. So he would keep saying, like, I can't believe that guy left. But you can also tell that it's bothering him at a certain level because he would tell a joke, like his next joke didn't really land. He told a very long joke about how he wants to sleep with a Mennonite woman. He said, Mennonites are Amish, but they use electricity. And he goes on to this long tirade about how it would be. He would keep the hat on her and also it's kind of weird. It went on for like 15 minutes of him like in great detail describing what it would be like to sleep with this Mennonite lady. And after he finished the joke, I guess people were kind of laughing, but it wasn't really hitting that much. He was like, I know the guy, he missed the best part. That guy missed the whole Mennonite joke. He's missing the best part of the show. So like whatever he would say after, he would refer back to the guy leaving. And he kept saying, man, I can't believe that guy left, or I knew I shouldn't have said that. He said, I'm going to be in a newspaper tomorrow over this. He's like, I know it. He's like, it's like something in my head told me not to say that in Atlantic City, but I did anyway. And I shouldn't have done that. And he was regretting it. And it was kind of weighing on him for the rest of the performance.
Well, sometimes jokes hit, sometimes they don't. I mean, it is kind of what it is.
Right. But although,
But
again,
it's
most of the crowd was still with him and still laughing.
sure.
You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
But he was really hung up on the one guy who left. I just found that to be interesting, I guess, from an artist's point of view, right? Artists can be sensitive about
Right.
getting laughed. And he's not thinking about the hundreds of people who are still laughing with him. He's thinking about the one guy who left. He did say the guy is probably still mad about it. And he's probably going to email a bunch of people and it's going to be a whole big thing. And I think he was afraid of pushback from that. The one thing that he did, which was probably smart, have you seen this or heard of this? They take your phones. So when you go to a show now, especially I guess someone who's a little edgy or can be controversial, they don't want you to just be taking video of them and posting it on social media. So they lock your phone up in a pouch. They give you the pouch, but then when you leave, they unlock it and you can free your phone, right? So for once, the whole crowd wasn't there, just on their phones, live streaming, taking video, taking pictures and whatnot.
Right. Yeah, he's been doing that for years. Because of that, like he wants people pay attention to the show. Like you don't want all the clips. Plus, when comedians do these shows, they're working out material. So like that joke that didn't really land,
Yeah.
it's he's either going to tweak it, he's going to change it, or he's going to eliminate it. And then when he does a full-on special, you're going to see all these jokes he's been doing over the past year on the road to know what hits and what doesn't hit.
Right, right. So he's kind of workshopping the material and
Right. And
doesn't
so
put
if
it
you've
out
seen
there.
it on the, yeah, if you've seen it on YouTube already
Yeah,
from all these clips, then the special's not going to be any good.
right. Or you might have even seen it in its premature form where it
Right.
wasn't that good, and you're like, "Oh, this is a bad joke. What happened to him? He fell off, whatever."
Right.
Yeah, but also I think there's the concern that some people might put stuff up there for the sake of trying to cancel them or get them criticized, maybe even taking things out of context, right? Just putting certain clips up to make them look bad. Things like that could happen too. But also I think there's the concern tax, right? Just putting certain clips up to make them look bad. Things like that could happen too. We're echoing.
Am I? Hold on a second.
Yeah.
There we go.
So,
Yeah.
I think there are multitude of reasons why people do that.
So yeah. So well, I don't haven't heard anything about that, but I did see there was a TikTok. Someone commented about someone walking out at Dave's show in Atlantic City, but of course they
Mm.
didn't have any footage. But
Right,
yeah,
right, right. And so it can't really
yeah,
get legs, you know.
yeah, it is what it is. People are gonna do that. People are gonna walk out. I mean,
Right, right. Uh,
so
I was trying to think if we were on stage, if someone, I don't think we would have made a big deal of it. Let's say we were performing and someone walked out. Would we have continued to refer to the person who walked out throughout the rest of the set? I don't know. I don't think so.
maybe not like it depends on why they walked out.
Right.
If it was something that we said like that and then they walked out,
Yeah.
we might have said something in between songs and
Right.
just like riff on that a little bit or something like that.
Yeah.
Especially if we just did a song and it was like hype and killed it, be like, hey, I can't believe that guy just missed that. That was just
Right.
dope. Like,
Right. Right. That's kind of what he did, but I think maybe the opposite of that because he was being sarcastic. Like he missed the best part, even though that joke didn't really hit.
right, right. I
Yeah.
think we would have done, we
Yeah.
probably would have done something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. I guess it does depend on the reason. Yeah.
Right.
If someone made a big to do of, especially because this was, like I said, a guy right in the front row, dead center. And so it wasn't like someone in the back walking out, right? Everyone noticed him walking out, became the show at that point.
Yeah. So,
And that's also why I was curious to see what happened on the later show because I
if
bet
it's the same guy.
no, well, yeah, someone said that when we were leaving. Someone was like, "Imagine the same guy bought tickets to both shows." No, but I bet you anything he referenced it. I don't know how much he talked about it, but I bet you he said, "Man, can you believe my last show? Somebody walked out and made this joke, something like that."
Probably somebody he probably did, and he might even reference it at some point on a future special or something,
Right,
depending on how well it or how much it affects him.
right.
What's up, James? See James in the chat.
What's
So
going on?
yes, there's a lot this week, James. There's a lot this week. It was a crazy week.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I am happy I got to see the show. It was a good show. I was pleased with the show,
That's
uh,
what's up.
and I do like his style. Also, I know that he's had opening acts at times in the past. I wasn't sure if he was going to because when Bill Maher performs, he never has an opening act. And it's interesting if the show starts at a certain time, be able to give you a few minutes to get into your seat, but then it's going to go right into his show. So you can't really be too late where you're going to miss the set. With him, with Dave, he didn't have an opening act this time, but he had a DJ. And I believe it was DJ Drama, but I'm not 100% sure, who was playing a set for about an hour. And so the show was supposed to start at 7. Dave got on at about 8, a little bit before 8, I think he went on. And so instead of an opening act, it was a DJ playing hip hop for that whole time.
Yeah.
They played our kind of hip hop, our generation, I guess you would say, hip hop, you know what I mean? Because I guess that's Dave's style of hip hop as well.
Dave
But
does a lot for hip hop like
yeah,
that. He's
yeah,
always showcased it. He used to he showcased it. Remember he did the concert show. He also showcased it on the Chappelle show.
right, right, right.
Yeah, he's
So
always done that.
he did throw in Not Like Us, but just a chorus of it. So I guess that's the song of the moment that you got to throw in there now.
It's the song of the summer, man. It is what it is.
So there you go. I'm glad I got to experience that. As I
But
mentioned, he doesn't do a lot of U.S. shows these days, and so it was kind of on the bucket list. I would have been mad if I didn't go,
that's
and
what's up.
happy I did go.
All right, word up.
Yeah,
So, you ready to get into this?
yeah. Let's get into it. There were actually a couple of decisions we want to get to. Of course, the major one and the more recent one is about presidential immunity and what that entails. We can
Okay.
start off with the one that came out before that, which obviously isn't as big in the news, but it's also very consequential as it relates to US law going forward. And
Right.
that's the reversal of the Chevron decision. Now, for those who don't know, Chevron was a landmark case. I remember when I was in law school, they taught it as rock solid law. You have to know what Chevron is, what that doctrine is, what it entails. And it was a deference to executive branch agencies when it came to interpreting statutes and setting policy. And so the idea is if there's no clear statutory language on point, if Congress didn't act in a very specific way in a certain area, the courts would defer to the executive branch agencies' interpretations and rules because they weren't going to substitute their own judgment for the experts that are in the executive branch agency. For example, the EPA, that was the big one. If the EPA, for example, makes regulations, as long as they're not stepping on an act of Congress, right, actual law that exists, they pretty much have broad deference because the court is going to say, look, you guys have scientists and experts, people that work for you who have really studied this much deeper than we can. We're judges. It isn't our job to be experts in the environment in these different areas, right? And so that was how this all worked, unless there's a direct conflicting statute. Unless Congress said you can't do X, Y, and Z, the courts were going to say you guys in the executive branch agencies have judgment and we're going to defer to your judgment. We're not going to override that. That was overturned this past week with the Supreme Court decision that came out, where now they're basically saying it's a jump ball. What they're saying is the courts have to interpret the statutes and determine if what the executive branch is doing is in violation. So there's no more deference that used to exist. It's not like the default position is going to be we're going to side with the executive. No, that default is now gone, and it's a de novo review. Essentially, it's up to the courts to make these decisions, even when the judges aren't prepared the same way. I mean, they're not the experts, and so they're going
Right.
to have to use their judgment on science and all these different things that they're really not prepared to speak on, and potentially go against, right, knock down what the experts in these fields are doing and saying. And
Right.
it's really a blow to not just science, right, but to the presidential power and the executive branch's power. EPA, again, being a major example of this, environmental protection. The ironic thing is that Neil Gorsuch, who's a Supreme Court justice who spearheaded this reversal, his mother was the administrator of the EPA in the 80s when the Chevron case was decided. And so under his mom's authority, the executive branch had a lot more power. These agencies had more autonomy. Now the son is dialing all that back.
Now, some of the talk on the internet about this is that with this ruling, that it kind of makes agencies like the EPA a bit toothless because was at least some of the talk is saying that these rules and regulations, companies could just choose to decide not to follow them uh, because there's no enforcement power now because of this. Is that
Well, I don't know if it's that drastic, but yes, it does weaken these agencies because what can happen is companies can choose to break the rule and essentially challenge it in court. And the court is not tasked with deferring to the EPA or these agencies anymore. And so the court is going to make its own independent judgment. Now, you may get a court that sides with the agency and thinks that the regulations are correct, are fair, right? But it isn't like it used to be where the court wouldn't even question it. That was what the doctrine always was. It wasn't up to the court to even question the policy unless you could point to a law that specifically said that you can't do that, right? That specifically contradicted that. Now it gives the courts a lot more reign to strike down these policies, to just insert their own judgment into the matter. And yeah, I think the consequence of that is you're going to see a lot less cooperation with these agencies, because they're going to say, listen, we're just going to challenge it in court, or what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? We're going to fight this, and we'll see what happens. Of course, the decision just came out, and so we don't know how other courts now are going to act. One thing I'll mention is it doesn't, this decision that just came out says that it doesn't affect the previous decisions that were made on it. So it doesn't undo all the prior cases that cited the Chevron doctrine. But going forward, there will be no such Chevron doctrine. And so there is going to be a lot more room for these rules to not be followed and to be struck down, and for the agencies to lose their power.
And it's important to note that these courts were stacked with a lot of Trump conservative judges during his tenure. So that could play into the decisions that will come out when these challenges arrive.
Right, right. Certainly if it goes up to the US Supreme Court, right? And that's an issue, I think, that is present with the next case we're going to talk about. It isn't only the decision, it's the applicability of the decision, how the decision is going to be used going forward, which is concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, it's a big blow.
Right.
And it's
So,
going to have a lot of effect.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I remember being in law school, learning about it and thinking it made sense, because judges, for the most part, are not scientists. They're not experts in these different fields.
No.
So who are they to say the regulation makes sense or doesn't make sense, right? Unless Congress said you can't do X, Y, and Z, why would the courts come in and essentially make regulation themselves? I mean, that's the ironic part of this also. The conservatives usually talk about activist judges, right? Or judges who make law. And they're always concerned about that, saying it's not up to the judges to make law, it's up to Congress. Okay. But in this case, you're almost saying that the judges are to make law, in a sense that they are going to, even in the absence of a congressional statute, they're going to decide whether regulations are worth keeping or not, based on what? They don't have the expertise in these fields. So
Right.
why would we defer to the judges? I mean, it kind of made sense to defer to the people who knew what they were talking about.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know that people who are in opposition to that, they don't want to listen to those people, because it's going to block them. And from what I understand, this conservatives have been trying to overturn this Chevron doctrine for decades.
Since the 80s when it came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that's also, I think, what makes it noteworthy, right? We talked about, obviously, Roe v. Wade being overturned. People have been trying to overturn that for a very long time.
Voting Rights Act.
Say it again.
Voting Rights Act.
Right. All these things are falling.
Affirmative action.
Right. They're all falling now. And you're right. It's not like this is the first time people have tried to challenge them, but this is the first time it's been successful, because that conservative majority that they were looking for finally materialized.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're continuing to fall. I mean, and I think the first big one that fell would have probably been Citizens United would probably was the first big one.
Citizens United did not fall, but that was 2010.
All right, come into being. Yeah.
The Citizens United decision basically said that money is speech, and corporations have the same rights as people in circumstances. They can spend as much money as they want on influencing elections.
The conservatives are playing the long game, and that's what I think a lot of people are missing out. And they're planning decades ahead, right? You stack the courts, the courts with people who have lifetime appointments. You got 30, 40 years of, leverage on your side. They're not thinking about, okay, I've got this one bill. They're like, okay, we're talking about the next 100 years here. And they're winning in that regard.
Right. And that's why we mentioned this before. An election is so important, and you shouldn't be looking at it in terms of who speaks better on stage, right? It's really more about what policy do you want? Who do you want on the Supreme Court? And like you said, not over the next 4 years. It isn't like, oh, we'll try something new for 4 years. No, what
Right.
happens over the next 4 years, 8 years could easily impact American law and life over the next 100 years, 200 years. Now think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Right. So that's what a lot of people seem to missing. So yeah, that's the first one that
Yeah.
that's the first thing that fell this week. The first
Right.
crazy thing that happened this week.
Right. Of course, the one on everyone's mind right now is presidential immunity. And there's a lot that goes into this. The court here decided that the president doesn't have absolute immunity, but is immune from prosecution concerning acts that are within the president's core constitutional duties.
All
Now,
right.
at first blush, right, first reaction to this, it almost seems redundant, right? You're saying that you can be prosecuted for crimes, but you cannot be prosecuted for crimes that are within your core duties constitutionally as president. Well, are your core duties as president ever illegal? When would that scenario even really arise? Right? They're saying that if it's within the core constitutional duties, you can't prosecute it. But you would think that anything that's a crime wouldn't be within the core duties in the first place.
Right. And I think what that's gonna do is people are going to use it to start debating every little instance. Like, was this a core constitutional duty or was this a personal
Right.
duty?
But when is a crime really a core constitutional duty? That's really the part about it doesn't make any sense. Now, I
Right.
understand some of it because we talked about months ago, I think, when the Trump lawyers filed their papers in this case. And we talked about them saying anything that's within the outer bounds of the president's duties are protected. Remember, they were saying that even stuff
Right.
outside the core duties, but anything within the outer bounds. But we talked about certain instances where there probably is immunity, right? For example, acts of war. There has been talk about prosecuting George W. Bush for war crimes, prosecuting Obama for war crimes. But what would happen realistically, even before this decision? What would have happened if someone tried to bring them up on charges for war crimes while they were president? You would, I think, easily predict the courts would say the president does have immunity in that case, right? I can't see any court in the US throwing Obama or Bush behind bars for alleged war crimes. I just can't see that. I think what they would say is your remedy is impeach the president or vote out the president, but this is a political question. We're not going to do this. And so I always kind of, even without it being black letter law, Supreme Court doctrine, I always kind of felt and had that intuition that certain things a president does are not going to be subject to prosecution.
Yeah. But at the same time, the question has come up, and there was a clip, I believe, of one of Trump, one of the but I think it was Trump's lawyers and Sotomayor, and talking about if the president decides to go after his political rival, would that be under immunity or personal? And then the lawyer was saying, well, it depends on, this and that. And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
where we're going to have a real issue
Right.
because that's going into, you know, dictator territory.
Sure.
That's going into territory that we have overthrown governments for other governments for,
Yeah. And I
you
believe the
know?
lawyer at the time was saying that you can only prosecute if he's already been impeached or something like that. He had some weird response to that, which didn't really make
Right.
much sense. But no, you're right. There is a question now of, okay, so what does this mean? How is it going to be applied? Okay, so we talked about maybe in an act of war that would be considered the president's duties. But now, what if he's assassinating a private citizen? What if it's an American citizen? Is that ever considered within his core constitutional duties? I just can't kind of square the two, right? If it's constitutional, how are you saying that it's also illegal and barred from prosecution, right? Your core constitutional duty should never really be illegal,
Right.
And the other thing is,
And the president shouldn't be able to assassinate rivals. Like
no, absolutely not. That's what I'm saying.
Not,
Any crime, if you were to do that, if you were to really do that, how could you argue that that's within his core constitutional duties? He's blatantly committing a crime. That's why this whole decision is kind of weird from the perspective of if it's within your core duties, it shouldn't be illegal in the first place. So why should you need immunity from it?
right.
But here's the thing also, when you're talking about elections, because so much of this is about, okay, overturning or trying to overturn the result of the 2020 election, or as it relates to the hush money case, trying to get elected in 2016, right? How is it that what you do to influence the result of an election, how is it that that is within your core duties as president? Because when you campaign for any office, you're not even allowed to use government resources. That's separate and distinct from your duties as an elected official, right?
Right.
Anything relating to trying to win an election is outside the bounds of your duties as an official, as a president, right? And so any of this stuff concerning the elections should be considered outside the president's core constitutional duties. However, there is language in this decision that's alarming, because it talks about, well, when he was talking to, I think it was the acting attorney general, that is within the core constitutional duties. Even if he's talking to the acting attorney general about the result of an election and trying to get the votes to win an election, how is that within your duties? I mean, maybe if you're being charitable here, to the extent of ensuring the integrity of all of our elections as Americans or something like that. But specifically when you're talking about trying to make sure that the votes are found for you to win, how is that within your core duties? That's you as a private person campaigning for the office. That's separate from you acting as president.
Right. And just even the act of doing that ask is using your position and your influence in the office to try to influence an election. Like that clearly isn't shouldn't be something that's in their core constitutional duties to make sure you remain in office.
Right. Yeah, that's not why
influence to overturn the will of the people. Like,
yeah. Right. And it's funny, right? They say core constitutional duties, really? To subvert the Constitution, right? To throw out the Constitution is within your core constitutional duties? Really? That doesn't make any sense. No. So, to take a step back, I understand some of the premise here on paper, right? Let's not misquote me and say I agree with the decision. I understand some of the idea behind, on some level, the president is going to be immune from prosecution. But if they're acting within their duties, they're not committing crimes. And so you also need to say that, again, okay, maybe acts of war, certain narrow things, but if you read the decision, they went much broader than that. It wasn't as narrow as that. Again, they're saying talking to the acting attorney generals within your core constitutional duties. I would say it really depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about your own election, it's not,
Right.
But beyond that, it isn't only about the immunity. They also said that if you are going to prosecute a president, you can't introduce evidence at trial relating to their core constitutional duties. Now, that doesn't make any sense either. It's not about charging them at this point for that behavior. We're only bringing evidence in to prove a crime. Why is that to be excluded from trial?
Right.
That's why the hush money case is being appealed now, because remember, that case did not concern anything that happened when he was in office. That was before he got elected. So how could that be his core constitutional duties? He didn't have any core constitutional duties. He wasn't in office. But because there's language in here that says that you can't even introduce evidence at trial about or relating to core constitutional duties, that now needs to be reviewed, right? Because if that came into the trial that led to the conviction, the appellate courts have to make a determination as to whether the verdict and the conviction can stand, or if that evidence that came in shouldn't have come in, and that's what led to that conviction. So it could result in a mistrial or the conviction being overturned based on this language. Which again, why is that in there? I don't understand why you would bar evidence of what a president did while in office to prove a crime. Again, the crime isn't his core constitutional duties. This is before,
Right.
right? But you're just using evidence to build your case. They're saying that you can't even use that as evidence anymore.
Right. I mean, listen, let's say what it is. This is a coup. This is a coup, an internal coup, and we're watching it unfold before our eyes. I mean, this is all centered around Trump, and why he gets this much loyalty is unfathomable. But I think it also deals with the ideology that he represents, that side and those extremists have been fighting for decades. And this is a means to an end for them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just think of an analogy to any other case, right? For example, we have free speech, right? We know that everyone has freedom of speech in the US, so you cannot be prosecuted for your speech, generally speaking, right? Of course, there's exceptions to everything, but as a general rule, you can't be prosecuted for your speech. But if you're prosecuted for another crime, right, the prosecutors can still bring in your speech to prove that crime, things that you've said. They do it all the time, right?
Right.
But in this case, they're saying you can't prosecute for a core constitutional duty, and also you can't introduce evidence of their actions, of their behavior, of their speech, even as it relates to their core constitutional duties. You can't even talk about it at trial, right?
Right.
I mean, to me, that's a bridge way too far.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of this is a bridge way too far. And look, they're setting it up to wiggle out of, certain things. That this idea of holding a president accountable, specifically holding Trump. I mean, let's be clear that or honest that this is all because of, the stuff Trump did while in office, breaking the norms, breaking the traditions, breaking the rules, and getting away with it.
Right.
And the GOP are complicit with it because one, well, two, he basically kind of holds the party hostage now, but also because they're getting what they wanted all these decades. So they're willing to upend everything to do it.
Yeah. The liberal justices on the court, of course, dissented. It was a 6-3 decision. The liberal justices are raising some of those concerns that how can anyone be above the law, and doesn't this incentivize any president
Absolutely
to
does.
breaking the law or testing the bounds of the law in a way they never would have before? Of course, we're in uncharted waters here. Was Nixon going to be prosecuted for crimes relating to Watergate? Maybe, right? Ford pardoned him, so we never went down that road.
Right.
So we never had to deal with this as a country before, and now we are for the first time. And yeah, these liberal justices are raising that concern. Well, aren't you saying now that the president is basically king? They can do whatever they want. The conservative majority is looking at it obviously from a different perspective. They're, at least from what they're saying, they're concerned about prosecutors going after presidents or former presidents every time that they leave office if they're from the other party, right? Basically going after them as political retribution.
Yeah, and but that's gaslighting in and of itself because it's first of all, it's not happened.
Right.
And the only ones before this that went after a president was the conservatives when they went after Clinton, which was fine because he did perjure himself. And so yeah, that's fine.
And by the way, I just want to, on that point, I think I mentioned it before, but I want to say again, I went back and I watched the Clinton deposition, and they specifically asked him, "Do you know that if you commit perjury, you are subject to criminal penalties?" And he said, "Yes, I do." He never said at that deposition, "Oh, the president is immune." He didn't
Right.
claim immunity. He said, "Yeah, if I commit a crime, I'm liable." He admitted that on record.
Right. And so, you know, the only reason why people are going after Trump is not because they're going after political rivals, it's because of the things that he did that he needed to be held accountable for. And what a lot of people are missing is if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the people that were deciding some of these cases, first of all, Biden doesn't control the cases.
Right.
And some of these were Trump appointees that even looked at it and said, hey, this is not cool. This is not right. This isn't a case of going after political rivals. If any party would do such a thing, it would be the GOP, the current GOP under Trump, who have been talking about we're going to file articles of impeachment against Biden when Biden hasn't done anything. But they just wanted to do it just because, like, well, you're doing it to ours, we're doing it to yours, or whatever the case may be. And this is a big problem.
Well, that
This,
is what the Supreme Court says that they're concerned about, what you just described, right? In
yeah,
the future, people prosecuting former presidents as a political mechanism. I'll say this, though. While I think the numbers show that most Americans do believe he is guilty of these crimes,
right,
you also see polls saying that majorities of people believe that the prosecutions are at least in part politically motivated. I saw a poll in New York that said that I think it was 64%, somewhere in that range of people in New York. Again, this is a very democratic state, not going to vote for Trump, but they're saying that they believe that that hush money trial was a political hit job.
yeah, and that's a problem, I think, because again, then that means people are looking past accountability. They're looking past what he actually did,
Right. Right.
and
Especially when they're saying that they do believe he's guilty. Well, then shouldn't that
right,
kind of end the conversation? Because what you're kind of saying that
right,
people are guilty, but they shouldn't be prosecuted for it. I mean,
right.
you would think they would want someone, especially someone in that position who committed felonies, to be held accountable for it.
Right. I mean, and not just felonies, 34 felonies. We're talking about a pile of felonies, and they're
Right.
not even done yet. There's
Right.
still many more charges against him.
Right.
Uh, and so yeah, that's a problem. It's kind of reeks of apathy. It kind of reeks of
Cynicism.
people just I don't know what other words. Apathy is one of the things. But it's definitely a problem. We look at the president and hold the president, even the president, accountable, even though they're holding that office, if they do something wrong, if
Right.
they commit crimes. We shouldn't want our president to commit crimes.
What I think it tells you is that most people think that all presidents essentially commit crimes because they're saying, yeah, we think he's guilty, but we also think it's a political hit job that, it's like selective prosecution. So,
Right,
right, that means that they're so cynical that they think that it's the norm for presidents
right,
to commit crimes, right? It's not
right.
even out of the ordinary. It's just, yeah, of course he did it, but still, right?
And maybe it's that it's not fully understood the depth of what he has done. So people don't see the difference or see the change or see the issue, what he's done. Like, yeah, okay, so he did that, but I don't see the big deal or whatever it is. I don't know how well it's being communicated, the issues that he has caused or whatnot. So like, for example, stacking the courts with these over 200 judges in the Supreme Court and how that's going to affect people for 30, 40 years down the line. I don't think most people really understand that that's the case.
Right.
You know, like
Well, if they
that
did,
fundamentally changes how the country uh, is run.
yeah. No, if they did understand that better, the overwhelming coverage of the debate wouldn't be about Biden stutter and cold, right? It would be about this policy we're talking of and the dire consequences for the country over the next
Right,
many generations.
right,
I even saw something earlier that said if most of the pundits on TV were not white, the discussion would be a lot different. They would be talking about the blatant racism that you saw
Yeah,
coming out of Trump's mouth during the debate, as opposed to
absolutely.
Biden's stutter, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that a bit, because
Well,
I
before we
know,
get into that, though,
yeah,
before we get into that, on this last point, I just wanted to bring up this presidential immunity uh, ruling and this question. There was a tweet that went out from Biden, and he said, "I will respect the limits of presidential powers that I have for 3.5 years, but any president, including Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor. With fear, our democracy, I dissent. So do I."
right.
So here's the issue that people are having, and I confess that I have the same thing. At this point, this means Biden has these powers that the court has just said that the president has, right? This immunity. But Biden's saying he won't use them, even if it means protecting our democracy. And so people are like, listen,
Is that what his quote was? I won't use it even if it means protecting our democracy.
he says, I will respect the limits of presidential powers that I have for 3.5 years, which means he's not going to go and do the things that
Okay,
we know Trump will do when he
right.
gets in and
But
knows
he's
he's
saying that he's not going to do that because he believes in democracy, though, right? He's
right,
saying that you're trying to turn this into a dictatorship, into a
right,
fiefdom, or what have you, right? I'm saying I still believe in democracy, and so I don't
right,
believe in immunity. I just do whatever I want.
right. The issue that people are having is like, we get that, but is now really the time for principles
What him
because
to do?
do this,
What do you want him to do?
just go in and just go ham because now he doesn't have immunity.
Like
This is what
what?
people
Like,
are
what's
talking
he
about.
supposed to do? You want to start committing crimes? Like, what do you want him to do? Why would you want
Well,
that?
that's what people are saying. Like, why can't you do something now? You have these unlimited powers or whatever it is, or
Well, hold
protection.
on a second.
You
But
can
see,
go after your
people are getting that wrong, though, because it's not unlimited powers. We're seeing, in fact, we just talked about
right,
the Chevron case. We're
right,
seeing
right,
the presidential power actually be shrunk. He has less
right,
powers. We're seeing his student loan action being overturned. And
right.
so the Supreme Court is actually saying the president has no powers except for the fact that we can't prosecute them. That's the only power he has. So I think people are wrong to say you have these unlimited powers now. No, you really have no powers. The only power that you have now that you didn't have the other day was you can't be prosecuted for your core constitutional acts, however the court interprets that. But so to me, that's just saying you want him to go commit crimes. That's what is he supposed to do?
They want him to go commit basically or get heavy-handed in protection of the democracy to prevent Trump from getting on to prevent Trump from getting elected.
How do you
Do
do
whatever
that?
you have the ability to do, even if it is not something that you should be doing. Do that to prevent that because we're at the precipice here.
I
That's
don't
what that.
understand what people are asking specifically for him to be doing.
All right.
Uh, you know,
Yeah, I've seen some people are just like, well, why don't you, let me see. I don't see.
are they calling for political violence? Because I don't think anyone should be calling for that.
Some are like, well, why don't you just go ahead and lock him up, or why don't you take him out, or why don't
You
you?
can't lock him up because he has immunity. They just said that you can't, basically. I mean, there
Right.
is a system, there's due process, right? We're seeing the system play out. We don't like it, but let's also keep in mind that there isn't absolute immunity here. There still is the ability to go forward with these prosecutions to the extent that they're determined to not be within the core constitutional duties, right? The scary part is we don't know how that's going to be interpreted. And also, by the way, the court is saying it's up to the lower courts to decide the limits of the core constitutional duties. So, what you can prosecute for, what you can't prosecute for. However, we know that the decisions of these lower courts can be appealed and do get appealed. And so, even though they're saying it's up to you lower courts down there to make that, what if they make those decisions and appeals happen and it goes back up to the US Supreme Court and they say, oh no, you guys got it wrong when you decided that. So it's like they're saying, we're telling you lower courts you can decide it, but then they could also say, you guys got it wrong when you decided this way. You should have decided it that way, right? And so that can, number one, cause further delays, right? Because it's like this ping pong game happening now. Well, it can go back up. They send it back down, it can go right back up. And also, they can look at these issues and say, as they've kind of hinted at and laid the groundwork for here, that the core constitutional duties, as they see it, are very expansive. And the immunity runs much deeper than we would expect it to run.
Right. So people are calling for Biden to stop playing by the old rules because the GOP is not playing by those rules. That fairness, that balance, that respect full of politics, that we know that the GOP isn't playing by those rules. Here's one of the tweets here. Um, President Biden can't be the nice guy anymore. He needs to fight because if he doesn't start playing hardball right now and the Republicans gain control in any way, America and every ideal our parents, grandparents, and great-parents, grandparents fought was for nothing. Please make sure he gets this message.
That's fine, but they're still not giving any specifics as to how they want him to act in regards to this case. And that's a little scary to me because it seems to suggest that they're saying they want him to break the law because he can't be prosecuted for it now.
I think some people are saying that if it's in order to make sure we don't lose the democracy.
Hmm.
Um,
It's
and
kind
I
of
think
crazy though, right? Because what they're saying is you're throwing out democracy for the sake of
to protect democracy.
yeah,
The
yeah,
point is, because I think, and it's not, it's crazy to say, but at the same time, we have to recognize that if Trump takes office again, that's exactly what he's going to do.
right.
That's exactly what the GOP is going to do. And everyone sees it. We all know it. Biden knows it. All the Democrats know it. The public knows it. That they're going to get in and they're not going to follow the rules. They're going to bend the rules the way that they want them to be bent. And we've seen them do it. They've been doing it through the courts. And so at some point, people want the Democrats to get on the offensive and using whatever they can in order to make sure this type of future doesn't happen. It's not, just posting a dissent or posting a statement about how you disagree with the decision isn't enough to say it. What can you do? Do something. And
Right.
that was actually trending on Twitter
Something, sure.
yesterday. Was
That's a,
do
that's a
something.
wholesome that's a wholesome measure. Do something, but I
Yeah.
don't think we should lose sight of the fact that if we're battling for the soul of our democracy, we don't want to be the ones that we say we're fighting against, right?
Right. And right. That's a big philosophical point, right? Like, do we lose the whole country by holding our principles, or do we sacrifice one of the principles in order to save the country temporarily? Or temporarily sacrifice a principle to save the country.
In doing so, you're actually also losing the country. If you're saying we're going to throw out democracy, we're going to throw
Right.
out the rule of law, we're going to throw out the Constitution, and we're going to say we're going to use this Supreme Court decision, which we say we disagree with, but we're going to use it to do things that are contrary to the core principles that we believe in, that we believe are essential to what makes this country great or what makes a country this country, then you've already lost the country at that point.
But isn't that very idealistic when we know that if Trump gets in, he's definitely going to do that?
So why would
Like
you want to beat him to the punch? That's basically what you're saying. You're saying we're going to do the same thing he's doing before he can do it. So
to try
at
to
that point, you
prevent
know better
him
than
from
him.
doing that. To
But
try to prevent him from doing that.
at that point, you know better than him. You're doing the same thing he's doing.
True. But if you're doing it to prevent that downfall,
But you've actually
you
sped up.
trigger the downfall to prevent the bigger downfall. If he
Right.
somehow is able
Listen,
to,
I don't think we want to go down that road. I really don't think we don't want to encourage the president to commit crimes. We don't want to do that.
I get that.
We don't want to do
Absolutely.
that, right?
I think we're one election
Stronger,
away from that
yes.
being
Fight
happening.
more, yes, right? But
Right.
don't take this case and say, as much as we disagree with this case, we want the president to use it, because that's what that's saying is we want the president to be a criminal. We should never want the president to be a criminal.
Right. No, and I get that. But we know he's going to, then if Trump wins, he's going to do
Sure,
that.
sure,
So it's like, what do we do
right.
to prevent
Go
that?
out and vote. That's what we do. We go out and vote, like and stop tweeting, right? Start organizing, start being active. start getting off your ass. That's what you do. You know,
Yeah,
we need to win these elections at the ballot box. We can't be like them. Giuliani was just disbarred today for his
right. Yeah.
actions in trying
Yeah.
to overturn democracy. We don't want to do that. We want to win with democracy. I know it's scary, and I know we can lose democracy potentially, but we have to take the high road.
Well, I think that's a message that Democrats, especially the Democratic politicians that have this kind of been on this ground of running from Biden because of his debate performance, need to hear. Like
Yeah,
this is not the time
right,
to
right.
abandon him because of one bad debate performance. Now is the time to, lock arms. Let's get this
Yeah.
together and help him get across this finish line so we can get this position and hold on to this democracy.
Right. And so a few points on that. If you look at the polls that came out post debate, number one, of course, right away, people were saying that the candidate should be replaced. And a lot of this, I do think, is the media trying to cause this mass hysteria because they know it
Right.
creates ratings. And, it's
Yeah.
like, oh my God, we got to tune in and see what they can do next. So there is that aspect. I think it's being overblown. But this whole idea that came out of replacing the candidate at this stage, well, if you look at other candidates that they put up in a hypothetical head to head against Trump, they didn't fare better than Biden. In fact, Biden fared the best or the same as all of them. And so that's the first point. The second point is polling after the debate shows this race is exactly as it was prior to the debate. It didn't move the needle at all. And so while there are people saying, oh, he had a bad night and I'm scared, whatever, it's not changing people's minds on their vote.
Well, that that's some good news in regards to that because, like you said, the media, especially, and not just the media, but also politicians and people putting out their statements and whatnot,
Right.
um, have it seeming or are promoting the message that this Democratic establishment, the voters, everyone is running away from Biden because of what happened at the debate, which if they're not reporting on those statistics that you mentioned, then that makes his campaign weaker and makes
Exactly.
it right.
I
It
was going to
takes
say that.
fuel.
What you just said is a right wing talking point. And by the way, they've been saying that well before the debate. They've been saying that he has dementia and the Democrats want to replace him with Gavin Newsom or Harris or whoever. They've been saying that forever. And the reason why they're saying that is because they're trying to weaken his campaign. They're trying to
Right.
make people think that he's not a viable choice because they know he's going to stay on the ticket, but they want you to think, oh, he was so bad that they almost replaced him.
Right. And the thing is that the media painting that, perpetuating that talking point or perpetuating that piece of information is doing a disservice to his campaign. It's almost like they're campaigning against him, even
They
in the
are.
liberal.
They are. No, they are. Absolutely. And again, it's
Yeah.
for the sake of building up the horse race, right? Making this
Right.
exciting in their eyes. It's about their bottom line, making money, right? They know more
Right.
viewership, more eyes on the product means more ad revenue and so forth. And
Right.
that's what they're after. It's, what I mean, they want to make this an exciting story. You got to follow every twist and turn and as dramatic as possible, as crazy as possible. They're
Right.
definitely feeding into that, right? That they
Right.
how else are you going to make this rematch exciting? They have to come up with a new storyline to make people tune in to the next episode.
Right. And there was apparently after the debate there was maybe it was an op-ed or something in the New York Times or article in the New York Times. The New York Times called for Biden to step
Yep.
down for the
Yep.
sake of the
Yep.
country. And I saw someone um post a message, I don't know if it's a tweet or whatever it was, and saying that the New York Times called for Biden to step down for the sake of the country and for the sake of our democracy after a bad debate performance, but they didn't call for Trump to step down after 34 felony
Right.
convictions.
Right.
Like
Right.
this is an issue. And this is New York Times. New York Times is not a right-wing
Oh,
publication.
right.
So this is a real issue here on the language that's being used and the messages that are being sent out.
Right. Right. And why are we normalizing a criminal
Right.
for president? Why are we acting like that's the
Like
favorite
it's no
that he really
problem.
got? Yeah, and the
Yeah,
other
it's
guy
just
should be
another
gone.
day.
It's like being brushed aside completely. People aren't even really talking about it. So,
Right.
and that's one thing they're saying, that maybe the conviction or the sentencing now happens in September, maybe because of delays brought on by this immunity case and the appeals.
Right.
Well, that actually could be a good thing for the election if you're a Democrat, if the sentence happens closer to the election, because if it happened now, as it was going to happen, probably by November, people would have forgotten about it. Uh,
Yeah.
but anyway, I did want to mention the Black jobs comment, because that to me was the most troubling. This isn't
Yeah.
just misspeaking or saying something that you shouldn't, phrase it a certain way. You have to look at what that means. Like, what is he actually trying to say with that? What he's
Oh
trying
yeah.
to say is that there are jobs, I guess, in his view, that are more suited for Black people to have, and these are what the jobs that the immigrants are going to take. That's what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
So, so it isn't like he's saying that, well, immigrants are coming in and taking jobs that Black people already have. We have no. He's saying that the kinds of jobs that Black people get or should have, I guess, which is very troubling, and I don't think that's being reported on enough.
Well, the main media may not be reporting on that enough. However, black media and black social media, that lit a fire
Sure.
under it. Everyone was talking about it, what are black jobs? And then there was the memes came out, over black jobs. And there were two types of memes, memes that went more funny, where they showed like Jay-Z in a suit with a do-rag talking about me at my black job.
Mm.
But then there was also um, black professionals that started posting memes. This is me at my black job. Because in it, most people who were listening understood that that was coded language, coded racist language that he put out there. And
Wasn't even very coded.
well, it, it wasn't very coded from our point of view because we understand what he's saying, right? But his side is going to argue, no, no, that's what do you mean? Like he's just talking about things that are someone posted that are traditionally or commonly done in the black community. I don't know, something
Well,
ridiculous
Marco
like that.
Rubio, who might be the VP pick, tried to defend it, and I think he said he was referring to low skilled, low paying jobs. That is the
Right.
insult, though. You're saying
But
that
that
these
and
are
that's
jobs that Black people should
exactly
have, right?
And that's exactly what he was saying because that's the idea, that's the mentality. That's what he thinks are are jobs that black people should have.
Right.
Or that that's what he thinks that they're capable of.
What
That's
he
where
chose
their
to do.
abilities.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And he also said, you know, I think what one thing that is getting missed in that discussion, like he said black jobs, but he also said again, because he said it twice, if I remember right. And one of the times he said black and Hispanic jobs. So
mhm,
again, what are Hispanic jobs,
right.
right? What are jobs that they're have to do, and I think people like Trump, people on that side have that certain image of what they do. And we saw, for example, for some reason it comes to mind the clip of The View where Ozzy Osbourne's daughter was on there and she thought she was making this great, strong point. And she's like, because Trump was talking about deporting all of the people that came across the border, and she said, well, uh, if you deport all of them, who's going to mow your yard, Donald Trump? Who's going to and like the rest of the panels looking at her like, no, that's not it. That's
Right.
not it. But people like him, and she's been rich her whole life, so this is what she's seen in California. So this types of things is very it's
Yeah.
for them it's normal language, but it's that specifically racist and bigoted language.
And we also need to fact check it. And the reality is that immigration is actually known to spur job creation. Immigrants don't come and take people's jobs.
Right. So they took our jobs. That's the South Park thing, mocking people who do that. They took
Right.
our jobs.
Right. Well, we got to put the poll question out there, and then we want to go over our poll from last week before we
Yes,
wrap
sir.
up. But the last thing I wanted to mention on this is when they announced that debate was going to be with no audience, I got a little concerned because I knew what was going to happen. And this is coming from a performer's background. When there's
Mm.
no crowd, it does tend to lend itself to lower energy unless you make a point to project and to act as if you are talking to a full crowd. You're going to naturally speak to the people in the room, right? And you're going to have a lower tone of voice and you're going to sound less animated. And so
Right.
I knew that was going to make Biden look and sound older and weaker because he wasn't going to be projecting. In fact, people were talking about that same night at the watch party. There was a whole crowd of people he talked to. And even the next day, he had a rally, a whole crowd of people. They said it was like a 180. He sounded great. Yeah, because he's projecting his voice to reach the crowd of people. And it does
Right.
make a big difference in how you're going to sound. Think of a performer, Jay. If we were performing to a whole crowd of people, we're going to be louder and more energized and more hype than if we're in a studio with just a camera in our face. It's just natural.
Right.
And so I think that's what we saw. He does need the crowd to get that energy out of him, unless he's really being conscious. Now, I don't want to make excuses because he should have been prepped better. And I think that should have been something on their minds. They should have said, hey, listen, there's a danger here that you're going to sound too low key. You got to step it up, right? He didn't do that. But it did concern me. I do think with the crowd, he would do much better.
Yeah, and like you said, that what it came out later, that rally, I guess he did after the debate, he sounded much better.
Right.
But we also can't ignore that he did not sound good. And
No.
it's not completely on the fact that there was no crowd in there, and not recognizing or acknowledging that makes us sound like we'd be in the same cult of the people
No,
that think Trump
but I
doesn't
am
do
no, but
wrong.
I am acknowledging that. I'm saying he doesn't
Yeah, yeah,
sound
yeah.
good, but that's one of the reasons why I'm saying, because people were like, I can't believe when he did that rally, it sounded so much better. Yeah, because he was talking to a whole group of people, so he was trying to reach all the people. He had to raise his voice and put more energy into it. That's what
Right.
he needs to do on stage, and with an audience, I think he would have done that.
Right. Now, he did ramp up a little bit better. Like he got a slow start. Later on, he came a little bit more alive. The thing that was consistent was that he had consistent policy. He had consistent substance to what he
Right.
was saying, whereas Trump did not. Trump was constantly lying or dodging all the questions. And I think one of the biggest failures of the night were the moderators who didn't hold him accountable for anything or fact check any of his statements or push back on anything. They just let everything go out as it was. And that CNN did a major disservice to the country by doing it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Some people were saying it was right down the middle, but they weren't really pushing back enough.
They didn't do anything. Yeah, they did.
So, um, but to be fair, most of the viewers did see through that, right? And as bad as the performance people say Biden had, people weren't giving Trump high marks, right? Unless you were on his side already, people who are
Right.
more in the middle watching this objectively weren't pleased with either of them. So
Right.
for different
Yeah.
reasons, for different reasons.
I saw a message someone posted a meme had been going around, just because you think Alfred is too old to take care of the Batcave doesn't mean you give the keys to the Joker.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
So, all right, we want to put the poll question of the week out there. And the poll question of the week is, do you agree with the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity?
Yeah, this would be interesting.
Yeah, please, of course, don't just vote, but give your reasons as to why. Feel free to pick apart the language used in the majority decision or in the dissent for that matter. So, speaking of polls, what was our poll from last week?
A poll from last week was, do you believe that identity politics is pushing people away from the Democratic Party? So that was a part of the discussion that we had last week from a mailer that you got that could be interpreted in different ways depending on who's reading it. And so put the poll out here, and now I think it's important to notice that this is tends to be a more liberal-minded site where I put this poll on. And so the results here are 58% yes, 42% no.
Okay. Even being more liberal, as you say,
Right.
58% is saying that identity politics is driving voters away.
Right. Now, that's what the votes are saying. But I do see comments that, at least maybe the ones who are speaking the negative are the ones commenting the most.
Right.
But I see some comments. One, no, bigots were already Republicans. Uh, or do you believe that identity politics is pushing people away from the Republican Party? That's a good question. Um,
Are they using it as much?
Probably not, because they're just outright being bigoted.
I
Uh,
guess they have their own version of it. Is it takes on a different form, right? It's more
yeah,
the dog whistle, I guess.
right. Someone said, I prefer our identity politics to that of the bigotry, hate, marginalization, and abuse by conservative white males and Christian nationalists.
Okay, but here's the thing. Yes, I agree. You got to make a choice which side you like more or do you dislike the least. But that doesn't mean that you should excuse your side from its shortcomings, especially when these elections tend to be very close and have such high stakes, right? To just say,
Mm,
well, I think they're worse. So, let's go out and have a drink. I mean, no, let's talk about what we can be doing better still.
right. Um, Another comment here is, and it's a good perspective, I think. Trisha D writes, this one seems to come up about every 6 months, and it can be summarized as, quote, would we get more votes if we were to throw minorities under the bus?
Really,
I'm not
though?
going
Really?
to, someone's like, yeah, seriously, this is saying if only we'd get rid of trans issues, we'd win. Now I think um there's a point to that because, you know, some of the opposition is pushing back on these things specifically. And there are people who feel like, oh, you're pushing this trans agenda, you're pushing this LGBT thing. Why are we always talking about black people? And that's what's turning people off. And so it's like if we just stop talking about that, then, we would get these votes
But I
back.
think it's more about the messaging than the policy in terms of
Right.
what turns people away, right?
Right.
And I do think to win elections, you want to add and not subtract. You don't want
Right.
to try to push people away if you're trying to get votes. So you can have the policy, but I think you can frame it, cast it in a way that sounds inclusive and isn't scary to some people who might misinterpret the
Right.
messaging behind it, not so much
Right.
policy. I mean, if I talk about MWBE, for example, minority and women owned enterprises, business enterprises, um, most people aren't turned off by that. They're really not, you know.
Well,
But
the ones who are already going to be turned off are going to
some people
be
might,
turned off and
but in my
already want
experience,
to.
I can have a conversation about promoting MWBE with more moderate to conservative voters, even, and they're not like, oh, it's disgusting. Again, some people might. There are people who have every kind of view under the sun, but most people can be on board with that. But there are certain ways that you can phrase it that maybe unnecessarily turn people off, right?
Right. And this person commented pushing back on that previous comment saying, I don't think this is what the question is asking. They're saying they think that the question is asking, has this overt obsessive focus by single issue people helped the Democrats?
Right, right. And to refresh people's memory, last week the mailer said our courts should look like us.
Right.
It was a picture of all candidates of color. And the question is something like that going to turn off voters who are not voters of color? And are they going to think, well, I guess I'm not wanted in this party, or they're not talking to me, they don't care about me or my concerns.
Right. Right. Um, and so there's another one here. Identity politics were created by Republicans. Democrats support the rights and the dignity of all human beings. The GOP has had a 50-year strategy project based on dividing Americans against one another.
That's a good point. And I would
Right.
say in response to that, that the Democrats should be aware of that and stop acting like Republicans, because that's sometimes what they're doing when they push for these segregationist policies, even, or messaging in the name of anti-racism or in the name of being inclusive, right? They're
Right.
actually sometimes so far to one side, they loop around and get back to the other side, right?
Right.
the Democrats were pushing for equality for everyone. But when you frame the message in a way that divides people and segregates them, separates them, well, you're kind of moving away from that. I know that the goal is to reach equality in some form or fashion, but it's easy for people, I think, to want to uh, get off the bus, get off the train when the message is being framed in a way that seems like it's just dividing people further when they were there for integration, not separation.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, interesting topic. More particularly, I think the most important interesting part is that on a decidedly left-leaning liberal thought site, that the majority of people said yes, that is the issue.
Right, right. Um, See, people always like you look at some of those comments, they're always taking it to the extreme. Oh, you're saying that you shouldn't care about the rights of people. No, that's not what we're saying at all. But again, there's nuance that's lost, I think, in so many of these conversations. It's about how do you get people on board? How do you have messaging that appeals to a broad base of people and doesn't turn people away in mass numbers like we're agreeing is happening, right? And the solution shouldn't be, well, that's going to happen anyway, at least we're not them. I think we should always strive to be better ourselves.
Right. No, absolutely. Um, I think that's, I mean, again, we quote it often, that part that says in order to form a more perfect union,
Right.
and that's, I think that's a part of it. Always trying to better ourselves, always trying to better our country, always trying to better our society,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
make it fair and open for, everyone that participates in it.
Right. Right. And the
Yeah.
key word there is everyone. And, I don't think we want to be carving ourselves up into groups, dividing ourselves by group. I think we want strength in numbers. That's how we achieve the most as a people, as a society, as a voting block, as a district, however you want to look at it, right? It's always better, I think, to include and not exclude.
Right. And at the same time, we have to be careful of the messaging so that we are including and not excluding
Right, right,
everyone.
right. Absolutely. And you can walk and chew gum at the same time. These things aren't mutually exclusive. It's not like if you say we're going to be inclusive of everyone, that means that we can't fight for the rights of minorities. No, that doesn't mean that. In fact, we're shooting ourselves in the foot by thinking that they're mutually exclusive because what's happening is we're losing people and we're losing elections. And guess what? Now we can't enact these policies because we don't have the power to do it.
Right. Yeah.
We want everyone on board with these messages and these ideas, not just a few people who are going to, who's going to cost us the elections. And people will be like, well, I think some of the comments said that, oh, there's just bigots and racists on the other side. But there are people who I know will be turned off by that mailer. Again, not the idea behind it broadly, but just the way that it's framed very specifically, who aren't bigots and racists, right? Who just will look at that and think, well, I guess there's no place for me in this party anymore. That's just because of the way that it's being framed. Like, they feel like they're not talking to them.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. And we said there were some quick fixes. We're not saying that they should do things completely different. We're not saying you shouldn't have diversity. No, we want to strive for diversity. But what if it says something like it should look more like Queens or all the people? I mean, there are more ways, in my opinion, better ways to frame that wouldn't come off as divisive. And by the way, just for the record, I did show that to a few people and I asked them, what do you think about this mailer? And they all kind of had negative reactions to it. They all said, yeah, I guess they don't want me in their party. So
Right.
that's a problem.
I think we might have tag team a bottom line again.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. So sounded good to me. I think that's a good point.
Stamp the bottom line. What we just said. Go back and rewind, and that's the bottom line.
Right.
All right.
So
Well, where can people find us, Jay?
they can find us on YouTube, at Nuance Show, Instagram, as well as wherever podcasts are. Just subscribe and it would have them pushed to you. If you're on YouTube, you can subscribe to the channel and get alerted when new episodes go up, and new videos go up. Join the conversation, comment, what they say, comment, like, and subscribe and all that.
And
Yeah.
share and care.
Share, definitely share and comment.
Share and fix your hair. And yeah. All right,
Yeah.
y'all. Thank you for tuning in. As always, we got work to do. Catch you next time.